So cyclonic and anticyclonic flow, sea breeze and land breeze, various air masses on large terrestrial regions, and you have fronts. So when you have multiple air masses, obviously it can happen that one air mass is just coming at another air mass that's already in place. So you end up basically with two types of fronts. One is the warm front and one is the cold front. Intuition will tell you that warm front is when warm air is coming into a region that already has cold, high pressure air. If it is cold, high pressure, it's heavy. It's going to want to stay put. And the warm air that's coming in is lighter, but it also is moister, because something fundamental to remember is that warm air always holds more moisture, right? So what happens? The warm air then is pushed up against the cold air. Because cold air is heavy, it's going to want to stay down. The warm air rises, again it's going to expand, the water is going to condense. The condensation heating is going to further warm the air and make it go further over the cold air. So this feedback, this is why I mentioned the word feedback before, warm air rising, expanding, condensing, more energy being released, takes the warm front further. So when a warm front happens, the scale of the warm front tends to be about 150 to 300 kilometers, depending on how large the blob of cold air is, how large a blob of warm air is, and so on. And this scale is determined by the fact that warm air is moister and rises above and condenses and produces rain. Okay? On the other hand, if you have warm air already in place, and let's say cold blob of air comes in, then the cold air is going to stay near the surface, heavy, high pressure. It's going to try to push the warm air up. But just pushing up versus climbing up are very different. You still have the process of air being pushed up, expanding, condensation, heating, but the scales are going to be very different, because instead of warm air rising over cold air here, cold air is pushing and trying to push up the warm air. So the cold front, when the cold air rams into a warm air that's already in place, is going to also have rain, but its scale is going to be about half of the warm front. It's going to be 75 to 150 kilometers as compared to 150 to 300 kilometer scale of the cold front. This is not very common in the tropical countries, but when you go to mid-latitude countries, then obviously you will have lots of seasonal changes where you get warm fronts and cold fronts, and depending on the temperature you end up with rainstorms or snowstorms or sleet, hail, etc., etc. Hail also has to do with vertical profiles of how the rain is being formed and so on. Okay, it's a very simple concept of warm and cold fronts, but it's a very important concept that you must remember. Feedbacks is a critical thing that is always playing a role in weather and climate.